It is Friday, May 1st. Let's talk PlayStation. Alright everyone, it's been a pretty busy week. We have a ton of big news items to go over, so as always, let's start with our PlayStation Plus reminder. You don't have much time left to grab April's games, which is Uncharted 4 and Dirt Rally 2.0, because May is coming up very soon, and that will be City Skylines and Farming Simulator 2019. So, the problem here is that these are good games, but only if you really like the genre. You know, they're both simulators. This is very niche. So this wasn't a very favorable month. I actually really like City Skylines. I've put like well over 100 hours into that game. But it would have been much better to pair one of these with something else that has a wider reach. And then it doesn't help that every single month we often have a PS Plus leak that are two games that are like way too good to be true. This time it was Dying Light and Dark Souls Remastered, and people just believe them right away. So that's why I don't often cover those, because they're always wrong. Sometimes they're right, but 9 times out of 10 they're usually wrong. So yeah, a little bit of a disappointing month for sure, but I say try City Skylines. Now, starting off the news week, we have 2 major release date updates to Sony's last major PS4 exclusives. The Last of Us Part 2 will now be launching June 19th, 2020, so not too bad, right? That's a little over 2 weeks from the last release date we got, which was, May 29th, somewhere around there. So not too bad, but because of that whole delayed scenario, we were thinking, all right, well, Ghost of Tsushima has to go somewhere, and that was the result here. So we have a release date update for that. That is coming July 17th, 2020. So also not terrible. Sucker Punch has confirmed they will use that extra time to optimize the game, squash some bugs. It's not a whole lot of extra time, so they can do pretty much just that. They will be sharing some more details about the game soon, dropping some gameplay, which is good. That was something I mentioned a few times where I feel like we need to see a little bit more of this game to have some confidence before people decide to buy it, and that's good to hear. But of course, the big elephant in the room here is that The Last of Us Part 2's plot details, total spoilers, early build of gameplay clips, the ending, all of that is leaking online and has leaked online. It's been through like 2 or 3 waves of information. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't run into anything, thankfully. Try my best to avoid it. Like I'm assuming most of you probably are. The studio issued a statement saying, "We know the last few days have been incredibly difficult for you. We feel the same. It's disappointing to see the release and sharing of pre-release footage from development. Do your best to avoid spoilers, and we ask that you don't spoil it for others. Last of Us Part 2 will be in your hands soon. No matter what you see and hear, the final experience will be worth it." Neil Druckmann also chiming in, heartbroken for the team. Heartbroken for our fans. We're still incredibly excited to get the game into your hands. And just to be clear, if it wasn't obvious enough, any clips that I show right now is just from trailers that we've already seen. You know, I just like to throw in some B-roll because it's not going to be just me for 20 minutes straight, right? So just full disclosure there. Now, what's happening here? Why did this happen? Who's it coming from? Of course, we don't know. That's really the big scoop here to find out. But the big running theory is that it's a disgruntled employee. Now, this was starting to blow up pretty quickly over on Reddit and then shared over to Twitter. It's a major write-up on The Last of Us Part 2's Reddit that claims reasons revealed for a disgruntled employee leaking The Last of Us Part 2. They claim they have a source that works at Naughty Dog, and just some bullet points. We can't read the whole thing here, but that there was a pay dispute, hundreds of furloughed staff. Somebody approached Naughty Dog to ask for an advance of their bonus pay because of the pandemic's release. People were looking at buying houses, having a wedding, sending kids to college, things like that. Naughty Dog refused, but there was a bonus given out to the management. People were upset. They sent out this footage to encourage the game to release early so that they can get a bonus pay after 6 months from the game's release. And that's what that write-up claims. So here's the thing about this post, is that it's very suspect right off the bat for a number of reasons. The one that really threw it away for me is that they said hundreds of employees were furloughed. That's like the entire Naughty Dog staff, and we know that they aren't furloughed. In fact, most of Sony Interactive Entertainment and most developers and most publishers are actually able to work through this pandemic by working from home. Now, on the flip side of that, that is the major reason why a lot of this actually happened. It's very rare that we have such a huge circumstance like this where a game's well over a month from being released, and I guess a different scenario here, right, because most of the game was pretty much complete and scheduled to release earlier than this. But, we don't get this much details and plot and actual footage leaking online before the game actually ships out to retailers, right? And this is a scenario that people are working from home, therefore they have access to the build, and they can, leak it how they wish and probably stay completely anonymous. So there's that running theory and that big possibility that that's definitely from a disgruntled employee, quote-unquote. but the post itself is still very suspect in that a lot of this is pretty twisted. Jason Schreier followed up. Obviously, he's got ties to Naughty Dog, and he's pretty much claiming he hasn't heard anything regarding this whatsoever. Mentioned the same thing about furloughed employees when talking to his Naughty Dog connections, that they believe that the leaker wasn't an actual employee. And that he's going to be doing more poking around to find out, where it came from. So here's the distinction here, though. Not a Naughty Dog employee, but I think certainly this could still be left up for debate in terms of a contractor, where it gets a little bit more muddy there. And now I'd actually like to echo another statement. This one's from David Jaffe, previously of Sony. He hasn't worked with Sony in a while. I think his last game was Drawn to Death. But, usual business here where he's got some connections in the industry. But he even just mentioned straight up, I am almost certain this isn't true. Bonuses never worked this way. When I was at Sony and I asked a current Sony person, they said, yeah, the bonus program is the same as it always been. His running theory is that it could be a QA scenario, right? So this is somebody contracted from an outside company providing workers to Naughty Dog. That company could have perhaps mentioned some kind of bonus pay that obviously Naughty Dog or Sony Interactive Entertainment doesn't honor, and it could have gotten messed up there. So I think that's a pretty decent running theory as to what's happening here as well. But basically, to surmise, the Reddit post is either 100% incorrect, or rather it's somewhat accurate in that the person being fed this information that wrote the post on Reddit just is misinterpreting the position that person has and what they were told, because they weren't told it directly from, say, Naughty Dog, or rather they were, but they were promised from an outside source, which would have been the contracting company, right? This is where it gets kind of confusing, but furloughed, hundreds of employees furloughed, that's where it's like, okay, whoever wrote this either didn't understand it correctly, or just, again, it's a complete fabrication. I mean, this is a pretty unfortunate circumstance. Obviously, there's two sides of the coin here, where some people are in support of the leak because they want to take a stance against, all the bad working conditions that we've been hearing out of Naughty Dog the past few months, and that's certainly one stand to take. If that's a core value of you, then maybe don't purchase the game. But then there's the flip side of it, where people still generally like working there. They just don't like the crunch culture. That's still what we're also hearing pretty consistently, is that Naughty Dog is a great place to work, just much like a big publisher, big developer. You're going to be given deadlines, and crunch is going to be a part of it, and that's what we're trying to change slowly in this industry with stories coming out like this. We're hearing that Rockstar's already made some great strides and fixing their crunch and trying to not put so much pressure on the employees. But again, it's such a multifaceted issue. We've had some conversations there, but there are people that still want to support Naughty Dog and what they're doing and haven't seen the leaks, and they're still trying to actively avoid them. So that is my warning to all of you, is that if you're out there, just try to avoid anything Last of Us Part 2 related at this point. Obviously, Reddit is going to be a tough place to avoid. It sucks that it's so far away from the release. So if you're actively trying to stay away from this stuff, not going to be easy, but there's Chrome extensions to kind of blacklist certain words and things like that. So I don't know, you're going to have to make do, but this really is quite a story, and I hope we do find out how the footage initially got out. But in doing so, the person that did it is going to probably face serious legal action if that person is tracked down. Now, moving on to our next news story, we have some PlayStation 5 games. We are getting closer and closer, everyone. So every single week, we're going to have more and more PS5 related news, and this time it's third-party stuff, right? So we finally have the next Assassin's Creed game, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, coming holiday 2020. So this game is pretty much confirmed for PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. It looks incredible from the cinematic trailer that they dropped. They're always really good with these trailers. They love to spruce them up and look really nice, and it does look very good. But this is a good segue to, actually, the Microsoft side of things. And this is why we look at these news stories, because, anything we see over there always echoes what we see over here, right? They have confirmed May 7th will be their showcase on Inside Xbox for a number of next-generation games. So there's nothing incredibly specific here, just global partners. That could be first party, that could be a mix of second party and third party, but presumably when you see third party content up there, it's going to be a game that's also going to be available on PlayStation 5. So very important, certainly worth watching. Even if you don't have an Xbox or any interest in buying Series X, it's always worth watching and check out the content over there and all the third party stuff that you'll be able to play on your PlayStation 5. So very exciting times are upon us. We really don't have to wait that much longer, but again, another good segue here. Where is the PlayStation 5 stuff? I know people are getting so uppity about this. Well, over on Twitter, Jason Schreier was retweeting the Xbox tweet confirming this announcement. And of course, somebody asked him, what about PlayStation 5? He responded, a few more weeks, I believe. Now, this lines up pretty nicely with what we were hearing from Jeffrey Grubb, who is a reporter for GamesBeat. He initially was kind of teasing that June 4th was going to be some kind of event. Then he updated later in the week saying that June 4th is for games in relation to an announcement from Sony, and that he wouldn't be surprised or people aren't wrong by thinking that a hardware reveal could be earlier. So what we are looking at, assuming that this is accurate stuff, is that Sony would show the PlayStation 5 hardware, that would be the design or that console breakdown that they plan on doing. Then an actual game showcase will be later. And now this isn't really abnormal. Remember, PlayStation 4, we saw the hardware after we saw a game showcase. Maybe this time around we see hardware before the game showcase. It doesn't make much of a difference, really. We're just going to see them segmented. And I would imagine that if this is the case, it's going to be very much like the DualSense, where this is just going to drop on the PlayStation blog. It's just going to be a matter of, are we going to get a bunch of high-res product shots, or will it also be accompanied by some sort of promotional video that shows the box, again, maybe that disassembly video, something to that effect. But as I mentioned last week, it is just getting to the point where it's kind of ridiculous and a little bit much. I know people are getting so impatient, but we really are almost there, not that much longer. Whether it's May or June, it's going to happen, right? So for now, at least, we have the Microsoft event on May 7th, so we can check out some next-gen titles. Again, very important to watch. You get to see a lot of great content, a lot of great games. You might even see something that makes you want to buy a Series X. Games are games. So if you're really fiending for that next-gen content, it is coming very soon. But I would imagine that Sony would probably do a PlayStation blog post or something for the PS5 hardware design and all that stuff. Games at a later event. We also have the official PlayStation Magazine UK. The magazine cover for the July issue, which would actually be coming out June 2nd, that's magazines like jump ahead, we'll be having PS5 Games coverage for that issue June 2nd, which is a little bit off considering that if the previous date that we just heard, June 4th, is correct, well, let's face it, a magazine's not going to do game announcements. So it would probably be very small coverage. Some people are really getting worked up thinking that this magazine's dropping reference to a PlayStation 5 reveal event or something like that, or major, game announcements. So the magazine followed up stating, no, that's not the case. We're not referencing an event, and we do have coverage, but it's just that. It's just coverage. So whatever is currently announced or what will be announced by that time is probably what they'll dive into. But the magazine obviously isn't going to come out releasing all this big news that 2 days later is supposed to happen during a live stream or something like that, right? So a little bit off there. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So if the June 4th date is correct, then this magazine is not going to have anything really cool to look at, I think. Or the June 4th event isn't correct, and it's actually a little bit sooner, like around late May, which is also something that apparently is being tossed around, right? I mean, if we go back to what Jason was saying to, a few more weeks until the Sony event, well, a few's like 3 to 4 weeks, right? If it's a couple, it would be 2, but he didn't say a couple, he said a few, so that's just getting really technical. But for the official PlayStation Magazine, we have another update out of them. This one was them referencing a sequel to Horizon Zero Dawn, which, again, a lot of people got carried away, thought, oh my god, is this the announcement for the next entry in the franchise? To which they followed up stating, no, this reference is actually to the comic book that is coming out for Horizon, which takes place after the events of the first game. So, and I think that's the issue that's out now, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe it is for the next issue, but that is another situation where people got a little carried away. But if we want to talk about the sequel to Horizon, apparently it's going to have co-op, being reported from the Video Games Chronicle website. This is them stating that they have some sources claiming that Sony wanted this feature to be a part of the first game, that there was some early build and testing for co-op-like features. Not indicative of what direction they were really going to take there, if it was separate modes or this kind of livable world where friends can jump in and out of your world, kind of like Borderlands style or something like that, like Destiny. Who knows if it had like players, world states or what have you. But basically there was some kind of co-op functionality that was being worked on the first game, later scrapped, now being moved on to the second game, and then it's going to be principally part of the, one of the core features of that game, which would be pretty interesting. Not something I would use or play around with. I'm just sheltered at this point. I like my single player content, and I just like my own world, and that's it. But this is something that I actually do think a game like that would really benefit from. Sony does need to get a little bit more involved in doing multiplayer, exclusive content, which, they work with a lot of third parties to do exclusive map packs and, this Saga episode for this big, third-party game. But they need some exclusive multiplayer content. They used to have a lot of that stuff in the PS2 and the PS3 days. Twisted Metal, SOCOM, they had a presence for that stuff, and it's kind of died down during the PlayStation 4 generation. And we've been hearing murmurings from a few people in the industry that this is something Sony's trying to remedy, which they started with a somewhat smaller scale title in the Predator Hunting Grounds game, which actually didn't review very well. So that was kind of a, failed experiment, but didn't really have a big budget going into that game, you could tell. Either way, this is something, though, that I think Sony should work more towards if they are looking into doing more multiplayer content. And this shouldn't really worry you at all if you're like me and you like the single-player stuff, you like what Sony does with this big narrative-driven stuff. They're going to keep doing that stuff. I mean, if they've said it, on record, well over 10 times in the past 2 years where they are extremely focused on those kinds of games, so it's just a matter of doing those on top of other things. So I wouldn't really be too concerned in that respect as well. Now, it's been over 1 year since Days Gone has released on the PlayStation 4. The game has hit its 1 year anniversary, and a lot of people are looking back on this game, discussing it, and we're seeing a lot of job listings being uncovered from Bend Studio that are highlighting AAA development, so clearly Bend Studio is doing just fine. I remember this very vividly a year ago on Let's Talk PlayStation, covering the eventual release and reviews of this game, which of course it got good to mediocre reviews. It wasn't knock it out of the park, which of course if a game doesn't get straight nines across the board, it's automatically a failure to many people. But it moved a lot of units. It broke UK sales records every single or it stayed on the chart every week, and did fairly well in the US. Apparently it's moved well over 5 million copies, which is on the low end for some of these bigger budget Sony titles, but any game that moves over 3-4 million is immediately a success. It just is. That's a large number of copies. So the game obviously has done quite well. So Bend Studio is still sticking around. That was something that we, thought, this studio might be on the chopping block. Sony clearly isn't afraid of closing studios if they are deemed redundant. And looks like they're getting another shot at another entry. Another game. We don't know if it's another Days Gone, but it definitely is another game, which is good. We saw, Sony Bend really flex the studio's muscles a little bit. This was their first really, really big budget game when they were, leaving all this, leaving Siphon Filter and PSP content, or PS Vita content, because they did Uncharted Golden Abyss. So good to see that Bend Studio is alive and well, and that they are more than likely toiling away on a PlayStation 5 entry, and that, with age, more people start to reflect on games that reviewed adequately or mediocre or good, and they just, really enjoy it once they're able to pick it up at a lower price. So that happens so often. Ready at Dawn had that with The Order 1886, where it comes out, gets slammed, but when somebody pays $5 for it, a year later, all of a sudden they're like, why don't we have a sequel to this game yet? This happens time and time again. But anyway, it's time to get to Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I'd like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter. If you would like to win a $10 code, it's very easy. We do this every single week on Let's Talk PlayStation. Follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to pay for your games. Those are some of the news stories that I want to talk about with you all. On Tuesday, we had a video about the PlayStation 5's SSD, and even Series X, the benefits of the SSD, how it changes game design, but on the flip side, why you might not actually notice it once we get 2-3 years into PS5, because it's such a behind-the-scenes thing, but the SSD really is the remedy to a lot of bottlenecks in game development and game design in general. So check out that conversation if you have not done so already. Don't know what we're doing this Tuesday, but we hadn't said it enough times. We are getting very close to the next gen content. So as a reminder, if it's a big enough news story, we'll do an impromptu video pretty much right away. Follow on Twitter at Mystic Ryan. So I'm tweeting up any major PS5 updates or if I'm making a video. So keep up to date with that stuff. And that is pretty much it. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.